I think my mother did exactly the right thing. I think it's absolutely extraordinary.
And I can't remember anybody except the Queen being.
For decades, Queen Camilla has been one of the most controversial figures in the British royal family. To some, she's a woman who stood by King Charles through the storm, offering him stability and companionship when he needed it most. To others, she is the very symbol of scandal, the woman blamed for the breakdown of Charles and Princess Diana's marriage, and a figure who should never have worn the crown. Now, at this stage in her life, the debate around her legacy has reached a decisive conclusion. For many observers, the final sentence on Queen Camilla has been delivered, and it is one she can never escape. No matter how many public duties she fulfills, no matter how many causes she champions, her story will forever be tied to the shadow of Diana and the tumultuous path that brought her to the throne. This isn't about royal protocols or legal judgments. It's about something far more powerful, the court of public opinion. And in that court, the decision is already made. Camilla's legacy is etched in history, and for millions, the words goodbye forever don't mean her literal departure, but the end of any chance to rewrite her reputation. Her journey from private mistress to queen consort is unlike any story the monarchy has seen before. It is one filled with secrecy, betrayal, forgiveness, and ultimately survival. But the question remains, when history remembers Queen Camilla, what will the final verdict truly be? From the very beginning, Queen Camilla's journey was never meant to be simple, nor was it ever painted in the colors of a fairy tale. Born Camilla Rosemary Shand in July 1947, she grew up in a privileged but relatively quiet environment, far removed from the glittering stage of monarchy that would later define her name. She was known in her youth as spirited, intelligent, and charming, with an easy laugh and a natural ability to make others feel at ease. Those qualities would later draw the attention of a young Prince Charles, the man destined to become king, and the man who would forever alter the course of her life. Their meeting in the early 1970s seemed ordinary at first, but fate has a way of leaving its mark in subtle ways. Charles was captivated by Camilla's warmth and straightforward nature, qualities that felt refreshing within the polished yet rigid world he inhabited. But the timing was never right. Their budding romance was interrupted, complicated by royal expectations and the unspoken pressures of duty. While Charles's life was dictated by tradition and the crown, Camilla's path was her own, one that led her into a marriage with Andrew Parker Bowles in 1973. Yet, as history would show, the bond between Charles and Camilla was never truly broken. It lingered beneath the surface, a connection neither time nor circumstance could fully erase. That connection, however, would eventually ignite one of the most controversial scandals in modern royal history, one that cast Camilla in the role of villain in a national drama she never sought to headline. For decades, the narrative surrounding her was written not in her own words, but in headlines splashed across tabloids, in whispers of betrayal, and in the collective imagination of a public enthralled by the fairy tale marriage of Prince Charles and Princess Diana. When the truth of Charles and Camilla's relationship emerged, it shattered illusions. The idea of Diana as the wronged princess and Camilla as the woman who destroyed a royal marriage became cemented in the public mind. Camilla endured some of the harshest criticism any modern royal had ever faced. She was mocked, vilified, even despised by large swaths of the public. For years, she retreated from view, carrying the weight of a reputation seemingly beyond repair. To many, this was her sentence, a life destined to be remembered as a scandal, a footnote in the story of Diana. But history has its own rhythm, and redemption sometimes emerges slowly, like dawn breaking after a long night. Over the years, Camilla showed resilience in the face of hostility. She began to carve out a role for herself, one defined not by scandal but by service. Through charitable work, particularly in areas deeply personal to her, such as raising awareness about osteoporosis and championing literacy, she began to rewrite her narrative. The transformation was neither swift nor complete, but it revealed a woman determined to contribute rather than fade into the shadows. Still, the scars remained. When she married Charles in 2005, The ceremony was carefully subdued, almost understated, as though to acknowledge the lingering disapproval surrounding their union. Even as she stepped into the role of Duchess of Cornwall, many still whispered of her past, unwilling to see her as anything other than the other woman. For Camilla, acceptance would never be handed freely. It had to be earned bit by bit through patience, humility, and quiet perseverance. The turning point came with Queen Elizabeth II's passing in 2022. As Charles ascended to the throne, Camilla became Queen Consort, a title many once believed she would never hold. On the day of her coronation in 2023, as she stood beside her husband in Westminster Abbey, the symbolism was undeniable. The woman once scorned had become queen. Yet even then, the public's feelings remained divided. Some saw her crowning as the natural conclusion to a lifelong love story, while others saw it as a betrayal of the memory of Diana. In that moment, it became clear Queen Camilla's story was no longer about scandal or redemption alone. It was about legacy, a final sentence being written not just by her actions, but by how history chooses to remember her. And as the crown rested upon her head, the question lingered. Was this her redemption, or merely the closing act of a controversy that had defined her life? For much of the 1980s and early 1990s, Queen Camilla lived in the shadows of Britain's most glamorous and tragic royal figure, Princess Diana. While Diana was adored around the world, a beacon of compassion and style, Camilla was painted in stark contrast, whispered about as the other woman, a figure of betrayal and controversy. The story was irresistible to the press, a triangle involving the heir to the throne, his radiant wife, and his enduring love from the past. Headlines branded Camilla as a homewrecker, ignoring the complexities of the relationships at hand and reducing her identity to a symbol of scandal when tapes of private phone conversations between Charles and Camilla were leaked. To the media in the early 1990s, the scandal erupted into full view. The intimate details, never meant for public ears, became front-page fodder, confirming suspicions and fueling outrage. Camilla was not just criticized, she was vilified. She became the face of betrayal in a royal marriage the world had once celebrated. Public opinion was merciless, and the British tabloids gave her no reprieve. To many, she had committed the ultimate crime. She had broken the heart of a princess beloved across the globe. Diana herself, in her famous BBC Panorama interview in 1995, cemented this image with the now infamous line, "There were 3 of us in this marriage." So it was a bit crowded. With that single sentence, Camilla's reputation seemed sealed. Her name became shorthand for scandal, a character cast in a tragedy not of her own writing, but one she could not escape. For years, Camilla kept to the background, avoiding the spotlight whenever possible, while Charles attempted to balance his public duties with the private turmoil of his personal life. But perhaps the cruelest moment came with Diana's sudden death in 1997. As the world mourned, Charles and Camilla's relationship was scrutinized under a microscope harsher than ever before. In the eyes of many, Camilla could never be forgiven. The grief that swept across Britain and beyond left little room for sympathy toward the woman now cast as a permanent rival to the memory of the people's princess. For Camilla, it seemed as though her story had ended before it had even begun, her legacy forever bound to scandal, her reputation beyond redemption. And yet, time has a way of reshaping narratives. While the public's anger did not dissipate overnight, Charles and Camilla quietly continued their relationship. They did not demand forgiveness, nor did they aggressively seek the spotlight. Instead, they allowed time, patience, and consistency to do the work. Slowly, carefully, Camilla began to step out of the shadows, choosing to be seen not as a royal rebel, but as a woman willing to dedicate herself to causes larger than her personal history. Still, the weight of scandal never disappeared. Even as she engaged with charitable organizations and built a record of service, every public appearance carried echoes of the past. Protesters occasionally gathered, headlines resurfaced, and comparisons to Diana remained unavoidable. Camilla's every move was measured against a ghost she could never compete with, a woman immortalized in youth and tragedy, forever frozen in the public's imagination. The scandal, however, also became her crucible. The relentless criticism forged resilience. It hardened her resolve to move forward, even as whispers followed her into every room she entered. And though the wounds to her reputation never fully healed, she learned to live with them, to carry the weight without letting it break her. In many ways, that endurance became her defining quality. By the time Charles and Camilla finally married in 2005, the public had begun to see not just the scandal, but the longevity of their bond. It was clear that theirs was not a fleeting romance, but a partnership tested by decades of scrutiny. Yet, despite the wedding vows and the slow shift in public perception, the scandal remained etched in the collective memory. For countless people, Camilla would always be the other woman, no matter how many crowns, titles, or charitable endeavors she amassed. And so, her legacy carries a paradox. She is both queen and scapegoat, both partner and pariah. The scandal that once defined her may have softened with time, but it never truly disappeared. It lingers as a shadow across her reign, a reminder that for Camilla, acceptance has always been conditional, and the sentence of public opinion may never fully be overturned. When Queen Elizabeth II passed away in September 2022, the United Kingdom and the entire Commonwealth entered a new era. Charles, after waiting longer than any heir in British history, finally ascended the throne. By his side stood the woman once ridiculed, once condemned, now elevated to the title of Queen Consort. For Camilla, this was not just a ceremonial role. It was the culmination of decades of struggle, resilience, and quiet endurance. The decision to style her as Queen Consort, rather than another title, was not taken lightly. For years, there had been speculation about what Camilla's role would be once Charles became king. Some had suggested she might remain Princess Consort, a gentler title meant to appease lingering resentment from those still loyal to Diana's memory. But in her Platinum Jubilee message, Queen Elizabeth herself expressed her sincere wish that Camilla be known as Queen Consort when Charles took the throne. With that blessing, the debate was silenced. Camilla's place was officially sealed within the royal hierarchy. Yet while the crown gave her authority, the court of public opinion remained divided. The coronation of Charles and Camilla in May 2023 was a historic occasion, steeped in centuries-old tradition. As Camilla was crowned alongside her husband in Westminster Abbey, the moment symbolized not just the union of king and queen, but the endurance of a relationship once thought impossible. The grandeur of the day was undeniable, but so too was the undercurrent of skepticism. Even as she donned the crown, protesters outside voiced their disapproval, a reminder that titles could not erase decades of controversy. Despite this, Camilla embraced her role with determination. She expanded her royal duties, focusing on causes she had long championed: osteoporosis awareness, children's literacy, and domestic violence support. Her approach was steady, deliberate, and grounded in the same quiet persistence that had carried her through years of criticism. For those willing to look beyond the past, Camilla began to appear less as the caricature painted by tabloids and more as a woman of substance, committed to service rather than spectacle. Still, the question of legacy loomed. For every person who warmed to Camilla's softer public presence, there were others who could not forget the scandal that had once defined her. The memory of Diana hovered constantly, shaping perceptions of Camilla's every action. Even her charitable work was often framed as an attempt to rehabilitate her image, rather than recognized as genuine compassion. In this sense, her crown was as much a burden as it was a triumph. What made Camilla's position unique was the duality of her existence. On one hand, she represented stability for Charles, his lifelong companion, his most trusted confidant. On the other, she was a symbol of division within the monarchy's story, a living reminder of the heartbreak that had once shaken the House of Windsor to its core. This tension meant that her reign as Queen Consort was never entirely her own. It was always entangled with the ghosts of the past. Over time, however, subtle shifts occurred. Polling data revealed gradual increases in public approval. especially among younger generations less invested in the scandals of the 1990s. While she would never eclipse Diana in the collective heart of the nation, Camilla was carving out a space for herself, defined less by comparison and more by perseverance. For many, this was her quiet victory, the ability to stand, crowned and dignified in the very space where she was once told she would never belong. Yet the final judgment of history is rarely about titles or ceremonies. It is about how a figure is remembered when the page is turned and the story is complete. And for Camilla, that story is still tinged with contradiction. To some, she is a queen who proved her resilience, who weathered storms no other royal consort has endured. To others, she remains the woman whose presence altered the destiny of Diana, forever the shadow to another's light. This is the paradox of Queen Camilla's crown. It represents both her triumph and her sentence. For while she may have secured her place in history, she will never fully escape the divided judgment of the people she serves. For Queen Camilla, the journey from scandal to coronation has been nothing short of extraordinary. Yet, as her chapter in royal history continues, it is clear that her legacy is not one of fairy tales or flawless victories, but of contradictions. She has lived long enough to see herself move from vilified outsider to crowned queen, and yet, the public remains divided about what her story ultimately means. The phrase final sentence speaks not to a courtroom or a trial, but to the judgment of history, that invisible jury of public memory that decides how a figure will be remembered when all is said and done. For Camilla, that sentence is complicated. To some, she embodies resilience, the ability to withstand decades of hostility with patience and dignity. To others, she will always be the woman who disrupted the storybook marriage of Charles and Diana, a reminder of pain and betrayal that no crown can erase. In many ways, her life is a study in endurance. She could have chosen silence, retreat, or a life lived permanently in the shadows. Instead, she stood beside Charles, weathered storms of ridicule, and slowly carved a path of service and stability. Her work with literacy programs, health awareness campaigns, and victims of domestic abuse has left a quiet but meaningful imprint. These efforts, though sometimes overshadowed, speak to a woman determined to redefine herself not by scandal but by service. Still, the shadow of Diana lingers. Even in her triumphs, Camilla's name is almost always mentioned alongside Diana's, as though her existence cannot stand apart. This tethering is both her burden and her inevitability. The memory of Diana, immortalized in youth and tragedy, casts a glow that no one can outshine. For Camilla, the reality is stark. Her crown may give her a throne, but not a clean slate. As she moves deeper into her role as queen, age and time add further weight to her story. At 76, Camilla knows that her reign will be shorter than those who came before her. She does not carry the burden of shaping the monarchy for generations to come. That task falls to Prince William and his family. Instead, her role is more symbolic, to stand with Charles in his final chapter, to provide stability in a transitional era for the monarchy. This is where her legacy becomes clearer. Camilla is not the fairy tale queen who captured the nation's heart with glamour and charisma. Nor is she the villain painted by tabloid headlines decades ago. She is something else entirely, a survivor, a woman whose life has been marked by resilience, who endured humiliation on the global stage and yet managed to claim her place beside the man she loved. Her final sentence, then, may not be one of guilt or innocence, but of complexity. History will likely remember her as a queen who overcame extraordinary odds to sit upon a throne once thought beyond her reach. She will not be adored like Diana, nor revered like Elizabeth, but she will be remembered as the woman who, against all expectations, became queen in spite of everything. And so, as the curtain falls on the drama that has surrounded her life, Queen Camilla stands as both a cautionary tale and a symbol of persistence. Her story reminds us that history rarely offers simple endings. It offers contradictions, shades of gray, and legacies that are never entirely one thing or another. Goodbye forever is not a farewell to her presence on the throne, but a farewell to the illusions of who she once was in the public imagination. The final sentence is written, Queen Camilla will be remembered not just for the scandal that defined her early years, nor only for the crown she eventually wore, but for the extraordinary, complicated, and deeply human journey that brought her to the end of her story.